Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. And this week we are joined by Mary James. How are you, Mary?
I'm great.
And we've also got Jay Fox back with us. Good to see you, Jay.
Good to see you as well. Glad to be here.
How's things? It's a little, well, we've moved on from Thanksgiving, Christmas just around the corner. Are you guys doing well? Looking forward to the end of the year?
Very much so. Like to put 2024 to bed.
Yeah.
We're having summer, right?
Oh yeah.
It's for me. It's getting warm down here. That's for sure. We're getting warm, but still fairly damp. I've been doing some posts recently about humidity and pointing out that some of our buildings have a bit of a condensation issue just as much in the warmer months as they do in the cold months, because we also have this thing called humidity, and that is causing some issues when the dew point is only a couple of degrees below the ambient air temperature because of the 80% relative humidity, which causes some challenges. But there we go, building science. All right. Well, we've got. I'm really pleased that Jay and Mary reached out. So we've got an interview to cover this week, talking about various things. But another, I guess, a journey of getting to Passive House, starting from lead, and also mention of NYSERDA's input, which is always good to hear about. So we'll get into that. But before we do, I just want to thank our partners for everything that we do at the Passive House Accelerator. So a big thanks to NYSERDA, who is our stakeholder partner, and our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingwe Architecture, Hartel, Rockwall, and Zola. And our champion sponsors, Boizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, and of course, Gulf 2050. And we'd like to do a big shout out this week, especially to RDH, who this week's feature sponsor. Big thanks to them. We've enjoyed having them on the show, various team members from RDH continue to do amazing work all about building sites, which is topical. All right, Mary or Jay, I'm not sure who reached out first. How did you get in touch with Crystal?
Curtis Ginsberg reached out, and because they are an accelerator partner, one week I was speaking with their communications director, and they mentioned that Crystal is a really good interview subject. I looked at her resume, I totally agreed. And so we set up an interview, Mary and I, to speak with her, and this was the result. This is Crystal Ng from Curtis and Ginsberg.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast. Jay Fox and I are speaking today with Crystal Ng, architect, CPHC, and director of sustainability at Curtis and Ginsberg Architects. So welcome, Crystal. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be director of sustainability there?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I did grow up in the Pacific Northwest, and having a lot of access to nature. I think that's how inherently I was interested in the topic of sustainability and maintaining and preserving, our natural habitats for our futures. I have an architecture and urban design degree. And my sustainable journey in the field of architecture started mostly with LEED. I worked on several LEED for retail previously to joining Curtis and Ginsberg, where I switched mostly to working on multifamily housing. And I was fortunate enough there to actually get hands-on experience for a passive house first time and actually learn about passive house on the job, even before taking the course and the exams. So that was really nice to have that experience and seeing it firsthand, like how it gets built through projects.
Very cool. And so prior to joining Curtis and Ginsberg, were you at all familiar with Passive House, or was really that your first introduction and you just kind of leapt right in, kind of feet first?
Yeah, that was my first introduction. So yeah, I was really thrown into the water there, but I really did appreciate like the verification that Passive House required and more than some other certifications and the deep dive into the building science of things and getting more to the point of the building envelope and really trying to reduce our consumption through that first instead of just always through like mechanical means or not thinking about that before we just provide a lot of mechanicals in there.
Great. And I understand that several of your projects have received NYSERDA's Buildings of Excellence Awards. And I just was interested in how the funding source in these awards have impacted your ability to incorporate sustainability features into your designs.
Right. At first, I think it did help just overcoming the minimal passive house barrier to what we would have to provide in the buildings anyways, like the increase to the performance of windows and walls and also the addition of the ERVs. But as you know, the industry is kind of building that more to standards. It's helped us like look forward to more renewables, that initial first mint in geothermal. It's been a great help to get that NYSERDA funding so we can move forward because that is a pretty large first cost investment for most owners. And it's also helped us to be more thoughtful in the materials that we are selecting in Passive House because Passive House is mostly trying to focus on the operational carbon, but as we learned, the embodied carbon of things is going to be a pretty big concern coming soon if we're doing all these passive houses. So we've also started to look and think more about the embodied carbon of the things that we choose for our passive house. Like if we're increasing insulation, we want to do that in a thoughtful manner and not increase the global warming potential of the materials that we're selecting.
Is there, when you say that you're thinking more about embodied carbon, is there a particular calculator that you use?
Yeah, for embodied carbon, we're using Tally. That's a pretty industry standard LCA tool.
Very cool. And so just kind of the atmosphere, not the atmosphere, but maybe the experience of designing a passive house from like your first projects. I know one of the first winners was Park Avenue Green for that first round of Buildings of Excellence up into 819 Grand, which is a bit more recent. What have been some of the changes that you've seen just in terms of difficulties you may have encountered while designing or even, just working with crews and maybe familiarity with Passive House for people that you're, speaking to on site maybe?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of momentum since then. And definitely when we were doing Park Avenue, most people didn't know too much about passive house construction. Most of the tradesmen had to be trained about air barriers and such. And as well as just difficulty of sourcing some of the materials, like there wasn't very many, it's a multifamily project. There wasn't too many advanced like heat pumps or ERVs that handled that high capacity. So we had to think about that and search for more products at the time. So I would say we still do ongoing product research, but it's definitely less than when we started on this journey.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I would say, I think looking forward to Grand Street, while we are still doing, like, while it's easier, I think we're also like the embodied carbon aspect. Like previously, we would do electric heat pumps. They do have a lot of refrigerants. And while legislation is changing to the different type of refrigerant and better refrigerants that we can use, we would still like to try to find different mechanical systems that could be better. Like that's why, if possible, we do the geothermal over the VRF heat pump. As you can imagine, for like multifamily, it's a pretty large system and you do have a lot of refrigerants going from here to there.
Just, I guess I have a follow-up there that's about a different mechanical system, but I do know domestic hot water systems have been kind of difficult to source for multifamily. Is that starting to get easier in your experience? Are there starting to be more options, or is it still kind of, still struggling to find a lot of opportunities to, use different products?
No, I think we have options now. Granted, maybe they're not as big options as we would like. But I think some of those conversations have been like even more minute to be okay of these options, like what type of refrigerants is each one using so we can make a better choice for those. So I think overall, the domestic hot water is a lot better. And also, if we were going to do geothermal, then that also like ties into the geothermal.
Okay, got it.
So is the geothermal, have you been using it mainly for the domestic hot water heating?
We do both. We use it for heating, cooling, and domestic hot water.
Okay.
And to our understanding in this climate, it is preferred.
Right. And it's amazing. I have to say, it's a little amazes me that there's room in New York City underground to fit, a new system in addition to all the existing infrastructure that's already there. Has that been a problem at all?
The size of the geothermal field? No, we haven't really had too much problem. Sometimes we do develop in very compact sites. Those may be less ideal if you have to start getting deeper. But otherwise, for most of our project, like that hasn't been the issue. And I believe that geothermal technologies and companies are working on how to make more compact designs. I think most recently they're trying to do like not just vertical down, but like they branch out. So then there's more surface area and you could do like a shallower depth. So I think manufacturers are developing like something for like more compact sites as well.
Sorry, I'm just now I'm thinking about geothermal. I'm getting excited here, but that's it.
I'm excited too. Yeah.
I feel like Curtis Ginsberg has quite a few projects up in like the Bronx, and that's a fairly compact site. But somewhere like, Manhattan, like core Manhattan, is that feasible at all, or is that still like you're just not going to have the space to do it? You do need some more space than that.
I think mostly in Manhattan, it might be the land, and we might not have that to begin a new construction as well. But I believe it is feasible. I think we are proposing it currently at one of our newer projects. Yeah.
So cool.
But we don't have too many projects in Manhattan just because of the lack of land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have been monitoring some of your projects, your previous projects, including 819 Grand, right?
So 819 Grand is not completed yet, but we have monitored other buildings, like actually the one behind me, which is Beach Green North, our first one. So yeah, we have been doing that with our sustainability consultant, Stephen Winters. And that was in partnership with the Housing Preservation Development of New York City. So they wanted to see how their buildings were performing, to see that proof of concept that you will have the reduced energy savings.
And are there any lessons that you've drawn from your monitoring that you're bringing into your design of passive house projects such as 819 Grand, which, sorry, I didn't remember, was not done yet, but yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I think it is partially user preferences that you see these differences in modeling and actual. So I think a lot of tenant education does need to be kind of integral in as the management of the building. What we typically already do is make set points for the heating cooling systems that have a maximum minimum. And this might not be the same everywhere. So I think that is one thing ownerships could do, as well as I know there are more talks about having better building monitoring systems, having more smart controls. So you do understand the energy uses of your building and can track that and maybe alter your scheduling to that, to what that fits the residents or the occupants' needs.
So what are still some of the pain points that exist in New York for building to passive? I know, it's taken off more so than a lot of other regions, but clearly there's still some probably hurdles you need to get over, whether it's sourcing or financing or finding qualified people to work on the sites. What are some of those pain points, and what do you feel like are going to be some of the steps that can be taken to minimize them?
I think financing is always a hurdle. It's been helpful that there has been, city initiatives to do that. That's why you see it spurred more in affordable than in market rate. So I think that's always going to be talking to the clients and convincing them first to invest in the little bit of the initial cost. I do think as demand increases, there probably is a lack of designers as well as like contractors and GCs and installers. And I think there are programs, workforce training programs that are addressing it. And I definitely see a lot of the younger people that I talk to are really engaged in trying to be, work for something that they care about. So hopefully they do also turn into more engineers and designers that can work on Passive House as well.
And does Curtis and Ginsberg work with the same builder contractors from project to project so that you have that familiarity already built into your construction of your projects?
Yeah, so I think the integrated project design that Passive House really tries to enforce as well is really helpful, that you're engaging with the contractor at the very beginning. Yeah, we do usually have repeat clients. A lot of our clients are also development manager GCs, so they kind of understand as an integrated company, like the importance of doing it well firsthand. I think the Passive House training, professional trainings are also helpful for any building supers that will be working on a Passive House. But I think just awareness and continuing education. And then also our sustainability consultants do on-site training, and they'll do, a tutorial about barriers to all trades at the start of the construction. So people kind of understand the guidelines. And I think just the process of building is helpful as well. And if not everyone will be there at the blower door test, but I think seeing the blower door test interacting with like where the leaks are is super helpful to explaining like what you need to do.
Just one other question that I had just about, Curtis and Ginsberg keeps winning Buildings of Excellence awards, so I'm assuming there's probably another one in the works. And I'm wondering what's coming up next for Curtis and Ginsberg. What's the next big project that you're looking forward to that's going to be attaining Passive House certification?
I think, well, I won't talk about a particular project yet, but I think we are trying to look at getting to net zero in a dense environment. So I'm particularly interested in trying to incorporate like integral building PVs, just because above 4 stories is really hard to do net zero in buildings, right? So I think that's kind of one thing we could challenge ourselves to do, to see if we can make net zero buildings in dense urban environments.
Be really cool.
Yeah, I think we did model it in 819 grand. So if we had the geothermal and we had integrated building PVs, we could make this 200 unit senior apartment net zero.
Wow, that would be very impressive. And that brings up a couple of questions for me, which is one, are all your projects all electric at this point?
Yeah, I mean, in New York City, we're kind of required to do that. Yes.
And then as director of sustainability, are you the one that's responsible for doing all of the Passive House modeling? And I wonder if, it seems to me you guys do both FIAS and PHI projects, right?
Yes.
But does that mean you have to work in both WUFI and PHPP?
So no, our practice mostly focuses on the architectural. While we have certified passive house consultants on both certifications, we do typically leave the modeling to a separate sustainability consultant, and they are the CHPC for the project. So we're just concerned with the detailing, making sure we're specifying all the things that we need to keep the energy usage low, so we don't get too into the modeling in our practice. But yeah, they have people there that can switch back and forth. Yes.
Right. That would be a lot to do.
Yeah.
And one other question about are you the sort of where the rubber meets the road as far as sustainability goes, or do you have a whole team at Curtis and Ginsberg that's responsible for that?
Yeah, we have a sustainability team, and we do meet monthly, as well as we do feel like it needs to be integral to the practice. All our staff should have a good vocabulary, even if they are not on the sustainability team. So we do typically, to kind of roll out these things, we have an office hour at our office monthly where people can just ask questions. It might not be passive house related, might just be things that they're thinking about. They might be project related, but we try to really integrate that into the practice and make sure that employees feel like they have a venue to discuss sustainable topics, as well as have the agency to try to implement any thoughts that they're thinking into the design, and just generally stimulate the sustainable conversation in our office.
Great. That's wonderful that you're working in such a supportive environment.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I think it's nice to also hear about the next generation of architects and what they're thinking. I do think the new generation, at least what I hear, is that they are pretty interested in doing more of that product research, and it's kind of in their forethought and thinking as they, grow.
Crystal Ing there from Curtis and Ginsberg. Really enjoyed that. Thank you both, Jay and Mary. Another really common journey from LEED, starting with that rating, really, really passionate about sustainability. We hear this from quite a lot of our interviews, and people starting out as professionals doing LEED projects, but then wanting more in terms of, I guess, robust energy modeling, verification of what's really happening in the building, and then ending up at passive house. Ultimately combining those two, and I thought, Jay, is an interesting question. I think you mentioned that Crystal does both passive house and woofing, or PFS.
Yes, she does. So she was, I guess we realized that when we were looking at how many Buildings of Excellence awards, Curtis and Ginsberg is one, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I think they've won the first, third, and fourth, or first, second, and fourth rounds of the Buildings of Excellence, and I believe most of them are PHI, but some are FIAS as well. So that's a very cool element there, that they're capable of doing both. But I think, I really appreciated how she came to passive house and really got to understand how integral the envelope is to actually making buildings really efficient, rather than the mechanicals, which she mentioned early on during the interview.
Yeah. The mechanical is an interesting one, because there's that conversation about a heat pump refrigerants.
Yes,
is a tricky one, because there is this big move, I know, in your part of the world to electrify, and that means moving towards heat pumps. We have quite a high prevalence of heat pumps and air conditioning technology already in New Zealand and in Australia, because of the use for both heating and for cooling, and pretty hard to meet the efficiency with anything else. But the refrigerant gas is really important, because there's a pretty high global warming potential from some of those gases, magnitudes of order greater impact than carbon dioxide, like thousands of times worse, which is usually, in ideal situations, not a problem, because they're encapsulated, they stay in the system, except that they don't, because we have leakage, because all the the pipes are under high pressure, so there's an assumed leakage from those systems over the life of the compressor and all the pipes. So that's why heat pump refrigerant is important. And yeah, interesting that they're starting to think about that.
Yes. And actually, the first time I had a heat pump was my previous apartment in Brooklyn. And one day it just didn't work. This is brand new construction. I think I'd lived there 4 months, and it stopped working because it all leaked out and nobody noticed. And it was just gone. So I don't know which gas was in there. Hopefully it was CO2, because otherwise that's not good news for anyone. But yeah, it was just people who are unfamiliar with the installation. It can seem like everything's fine, and then you find out later that all of it's leaked out, and there's really no indicator until it's too late. And that's what,
you can't see it. They're sort of invisible gases. They're probably odorless as well. It's not stuff you want to be breathing in, but it would disperse pretty quickly. So you'd never know.
Yes.
Other than it just, like you say, not working.
And it was, I believe the part was not tightened by the compressor, so it was out, on the rooftop. So it's not like we had any idea. It just literally stopped working one day.
Yeah.
Which is sort of exciting that they've been exploring geothermal so they can minimize the heat pump systems. And which to me is really amazing in New York City. Because I think of land costs is, obviously sky high, but also just that there's a lot of things going on below the surface already in New York City, and that it's just great that NYSERDA has given them funding to allow them to explore these other technologies like geothermal.
Yeah. They're just outside my office here in Auckland. We are getting a subway, essentially. They're retrofitting a train to central Auckland. So for the past couple of years, as I've been riding my bike into the office, I've seen quite large holes, and it's amazing how much stuff is down there. And we've also been told, because of the disruption to the building, of the work that's been going on, and part of that involves surveying and finding out what's down there before you can dig a big hole. And I imagine a place like New York, it's not easy to dig a hole without hitting something that's potentially really, really important for water or power or internet or who knows what else. So I thought that was a really good question, Mary, about how do you do something in the ground in a place so dense as New York. Then the other bit you touched on was around monitoring, which I'm really interested in, because I think this is it's one of those things that it would be great to have been doing more of years ago, so that we have data. But there's no other, the best time to then start is now to really figure out. And I know that some people have been a little bit nervous about starting monitoring because they're not sure that they want the results, or what if those results aren't what we'd hoped for. But I don't think that's a good reason to not monitor what's going on in buildings, and the technology available for doing that is pretty incredible these days. So I'm excited that companies like Curtis and Ginsberg are either doing it directly or working with other groups to do monitoring of not just power use, but also indoor comfort, moisture, all the other features of the building envelope.
Right. I mean, it's always great to be able to compare modeled energy use to actual energy use, because that's where we understand what's working and what isn't working.
Yeah.
And how to refine it to make it work better.
Yeah, and a lot of the work that I'm involved in at the moment, we're trying to gauge just how far we need to go on thermal bridges of building envelopes because of the moisture issue, and a lot of those answers we don't know. I mean, WUFI kind of tells us how much of a moisture issue we might have over a period of time, but we need to calibrate that for real life conditions, because we've got humans, and humans do weird things inside buildings. So getting monitoring equipment inside building assemblies is really important to calibrate those models and really understand how much of a problem that moisture is over a period of time. So I'm really advocating for more monitoring to see what's happening in real life. Awesome. All right. Hey, well, thank you both for that. Really great to hear, as you say, Jay, that pretty amazing track record of Curtis and Ginsberg, award-winning firm, and really great to see them supported by NYSERDA, as Crystal mentioned, with some other leading examples out there. It's really, really great to see. All right.
I'm excited to see what they do next. As I think she mentioned, there's a lot of younger people who are part of the firm and really engaged. And yeah, it's exciting to see what they'll do for Buildings of Excellence Round 5.
Nice. All right. Hey, well, thank you both. We are getting close to the end, so sort of it's getting a little bit quieter, but there's heaps of stuff to keep you entertained if you need a bit of a break from family or whatever else you're up to over the break, if you're having one. So check out all of the great stuff over at the Passive House Accelerator, and of course, Reimagine Buildings Collective as well, where we've got some really good stuff that's already available there, but there's also some live events like Ask Me Anythings as well. So check those out. Make sure you are getting newsletters and updates if you're not already subscribed to that, so you don't miss all the good stuff that's happening over there. All right. Thank you both. We'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.